Um, Good question. And obviously we had some good reasons to embark on this endeavor, leading to a lot of conversations that we had within the editorial team. I guess one thing is the limitations of existing editorials on theory and theorizing. They are fantastic in what they are doing, but they're not necessarily doing the same that we want to achieve here. Quite often they are about expectations on what makes a good theory paper, or they are rather specific writing-related advice on how to frame, for instance, a theoretical contribution. Many of them also fall short on directly defining what theory is or can be. One well-known editor even talks about or tackles that question by exploring on what theory is not. But even, and that's important, but even when theory is defined, such definitions are limited to law-like constructs, similar to the use of theory in science, not necessarily in the social sciences. And with that, they propagate a specific form of theorizing for a field. And that's not always ideal. And that was somehow the starting point for our conversation, for our editorial. We here wish to offer broader, more complex, more pluralistic understanding of theory. Existing editorials usually tend to close. We wish to open up, and we do so by exploring alternative forms of theorizing that in the end materialize in different theory papers.
What is theory? Well, theory is many different things. And that's why people often talk about theory as an umbrella concept or container term. And Robert Merton famously also criticized that people are using the term theory in so many different ways that he sees a danger that it becomes meaningless. Yes, indeed, there are many different meanings of theory and many different forms of theorizing. And that's exactly the point of our editorial paper. But there are also some aspects that are core to all of these different forms of theory, core to all of these different meanings. Theory refers to scholarly work that researchers do in pursuit of informed knowledge claims. That is about qualified assertions regarding how something can generally be understood or explained. And at the core of that is conceptualization. Some people say that conceptualization is just sort of the first step towards theory, towards theorizing. But we would say, well, it's actually at the heart. And so we would say conceptualization is theory writ large. So what is conceptualization? Simply put, conceptualization is the act of naming and framing the topic that you're interested in, the topic you are studying, in terms of specific theoretical concepts. For example, a piece of naturally occurring talk can be categorized and conceptualized as identity work, as discourse, role enactment, or whatever. And then you discuss that in terms of the different concepts that come with that. And that way you bump up sort of the specific phenomenon or the instance you're interested in to a more general abstract level. You abstract out from the concrete particular instance, particular phenomenon that you're looking at towards the level of theoretical concepts. And this conceptualization, we would say, is core to all forms of theory or theorizing. But depending on the aims and purposes and the particular ways in which you conceptualize, you can then differentiate different forms of theory and theorizing.
As David mentioned, conceptualization is part and parcel of almost every form of theorizing in our field, but how a particular conceptualization is worked with and what it's configured into and how it's being used towards making certain knowledge claims, that really depends on what we argue in the editorial is the knowledge interest that is at the heart of the theorizing effort. And here we take inspiration to think about different forms of theorizing, take inspiration from the original meanings of the word theory and the original debates also in philosophical circles around what theory the word means and how it should be conceived. And based on those original meanings and discussions, we think it's important to realize that some forms of theorizing are based on an explanatory interest. There are some other forms of theorizing that are more guided by, inspired by an interpretive interest. And then there are yet others that are based on an emancipatory or critical interest. And the difference between them, as you can see in this table here, is that with an explanatory approach, our aim as researchers is really to get at the underlying structures and processes of a particular phenomenon. So we use our conceptualization and put it to work through propositional reasoning or process theorizing, for instance, to ever get closer to those underlying structures and processes as, that we believe might explain a particular phenomenon. With the second set of approaches, so the three that we've classed as ideal type, ideal typical approaches in that explanatory tradition. The second set of approaches are inspired by the interpretive tradition, where as a researcher, we're effectively rethinking or we're questioning our conceptual resources that we've previously been using to engage, to interpret, but also explain certain phenomena. So we're questioning assumptions, we're questioning some of the key concepts that we're working with. We're questioning that in a way where we're trying to suggest that an alternative, deeper, better, more comprehensive reading of a phenomenon would be better. So in this set of approaches, what you do as a researcher is that you engage effectively in a resignification effort, where you're resignifying our existing ways of thinking into a deeper, more comprehensive alternative reading, and you offer new conceptual resources, you build new theory effectively for the field to work with. And then finally, in the emancipatory interest, so that's towards the end of this particular table, the idea is to really to critique our existing ways of thinking, to problematize our existing ways of theorizing, the assumptions that we've been working from, the key logics that we've been using to think about and understand a particular topic, to really deeply critique those and to provoke us into a different way of thinking. And we highlight two ideal typical ways in which that can be done, and we give some examples also in the editorial of good examples of authors that have followed this type of approach, this form of theorizing, to critique existing theories and also create an opening with that towards an alternative, better and normatively better way of thinking about a particular topic.
In all honesty, I don't think so. Our editorial is informed by our experience as authors, as readers, as reviewers, as editors. We here wish to give voice to alternative forms of theorizing beyond the one dominant form of theory building in organizational management theory, that is the propositional form, which is important, but by far not the only one and not the only useful one. So our editorial is meant as a springboard for our audience rather than a straitjacket. It's meant as an open list, and we are well aware that there are potentially other forms of theorizing out there and also alternative forms and approaches to knowledge. And in addition, by all means, there are ideal types. These forms of theorizing are ideal types. So hybrids are possible. So all in all, we understand this editorial more as an offer, as an opening, as a point of departure rather than a closure.
That's a good question. As Markus just mentioned, our aim with the editorial is to open things up and to recognize that each of these forms of theorizing has a place in our community. They're all part of our system of knowledge production, so to speak. So we also hope that with the editorial, people realize that these different forms have different roles to play. So, and when they work together, they are really ways of enriching our knowledge base, of giving different answers, making us more reflexive and looking more deeply into particular phenomena and being able to say many more different things about those phenomena than relying on one particular approach would allow us to do. So we really need to value also these different forms of theorizing as existing together. And with organizational theory, that's also part of our mission to be a place for these different forms of theorizing to be published and to be there and in conversation with one another. And if we do that well, we're hoping that the journal will be a source journal for the community where we publish the best theoretical work, but from these different vantage points.